I'm really excited to get into today's topic, and hopefully you can come away with some tips and tricks on how to incorporate more healthy habits into your life that actually work for you. So before we get into it today, I like to start off with a small intention or a question to keep in the back of your mind as we cover all of the topics today. And so I invite you to think about the health goal that you want to implement, the habit, and then bring it back down to the very smallest thing that you can do to get you a little bit closer to your goal. So it doesn't have to be big. It can be literally the smallest thing that gets you an inch closer to where you want to be. So before we get into it, I'd like to share a little story about myself. Before UC Santa Cruz, before nutrition, before health coaching, I was a bread baker. And I remember when I first started, I was not very good, as most new bread bakers are. And everything stuck to my hands. I couldn't get the dough to do anything that I wanted to. It was really hard. But after a couple of months, I noticed that it wasn't quite sticking to my hand as much. And the dough was doing a little bit more of what I wanted to. And so by the time Thanksgiving came around, there was just so much to do that you really had to just work as fast as you could and essentially like turn your brain off. But everything happened. My hands were clean, the dough did the right things, and it was really cool because at that moment, I realized that I had done these things so frequently over time. I started to internalize it, and it ultimately became a habit. And so you'll notice this in your own lives as well, such as being able to type or driving a car. These things were very hard when we first started, but now they're things that you probably don't think about too much. So I'd like to differentiate the difference between a goal and a habit. They go hand in hand, but a goal is like this overarching result or benchmark that you want to reach. Whereas a habit, these are the actions that you take and over time start to become automatic. And these habits will bring us closer to our goals. So studies show that when folks understand what a habit is and can break it down into its parts, then they're better able to address these different portions of it and incorporate the habits into their lives more easily. And so a habit loop goes off, starting with a cue. This is the event that kind of starts this chain reaction that lets you know this action is going to be taking place next. So, for instance, every morning or more mornings than not, we're probably waking up with an alarm. And so, after that cue being the alarm, the next action that you would perform is getting out of bed. Or if you're like me, maybe you snooze a couple times, but you get up eventually. After the action that is performed, then that leads to a reward. The rewards are, they can be positive, but not necessarily. They can also be negative or even neutral. And so for folks who get up right away, you have more time for your morning routine. You can make some tea or coffee. But those of us who might snooze a couple times don't have as much morning routine time as we may intend or anticipate. For the healthy habits that we're trying to implement, there is an estimate that research has kind of suggested it takes for habits to develop just slightly more than half a year, or sorry, half a month, and then just slightly more than 8 months at the max, with the average being 66 days. But really, this depends on you and where you're at. And so even if you're trying to implement a habit that someone else has that has taken X amount of time for them that may not necessarily work for you because you have your own individual situation and you're starting where you're at, which is not going to be the same as the next person. So now we're going to break down the process of identifying this plan of how the habit is going to unfold. So essentially, we're going to be making a system because in our days, more often than not, the things that we execute run on systems. When we wake up in the morning, it's because the alarm went off, we get out of bed, we have our morning routine, and it goes the same more or less every time, and it's successful. When it deviates from the system, then some roadblocks might arise. But another example, we probably need to make meetings from time to time. And so when we come to that situation, we figure out the information that we need to share in the meeting. We also need to determine on who needs to be there. Take a look probably at their calendars to see if they're even available, and then make a Zoom link, send it out so that everyone has the invite. The reward is people are available, they accept your meeting invitation, you have a meeting, and it's great. So some may say that willpower and motivation and self-control are all really important in developing healthy habits. But I like to remind that all of these qualities, while they can be very great in giving you motivation and getting started, it's incredibly hard to keep up willpower and self-control and your motivation really high as time goes on. And so in creating this system, we have a plan to fall back on for those times where you maybe don't feel like doing the thing, or if life gets in the way, work gets really hectic, you have so many obligations at home. We have something that we can fall back on so that we can still make moves towards our goals. So before we do any planning, I invite you to take a look at your day-to-day, reflect a little bit about yourself, and identify the reasons why you want to start this habit, why you want to reach this goal. How is your life going to improve? Write down all the positives, think of all the positives, what have you. And also decide whether or not this new habit is going to be something that you're adding to your routine, or maybe you're trying to replace something that doesn't serve you any longer. And then for those old habits that you might want to get rid of, using something in the replacement of it is really powerful, because when you get rid of something, you'll fill it with something else. And so determining what that something else beforehand is will be very beneficial. Next, understand where you're starting. If you want to run a 5K, which is over slightly over 3 miles, and that is one of your goals, that's a great goal. But if you haven't run since middle school, maybe setting your goal to running 3 miles 5 days a week, starting week one, may not be where to start for you. Depending on your fitness, depending on how often you're out, if you know what route you want to take, or if you want to run on a treadmill, there's so many factors to consider. And maybe meeting yourself where you're at kind of addresses that. So if you're starting from zero, maybe thinking, I can go out and jog for 15 minutes 2 or 3 times a week. And that might be a little bit more in line, a little bit more feasible to your own situation. Next, understanding what support you have in place or you might need. Do you have the equipment available if your habit requires it? For instance, folks that want to start up a new hobby, maybe you want to learn how to paint. first things first, you kind of need pain before to get everything going. But also, maybe you need some social support. Maybe you need to get your family involved, your friends involved, so that they can be with you on this journey to pat you on the back, to be the bouncing board if you're trying to work some things out for. This is also a great reason why you can get an accountability buddy. And so that's just someone that you can check in with from time to time to talk about your progress and keep you on your goals. Next, finally, identifying what'll happen if you don't implement this habit, if nothing does change in your life. Depending on your goal, that might affect any health outcomes that might transpire. If you're looking to add more time for the things and the people that you love, maybe you don't get as much time as you originally want. And so understanding what happens if nothing changes, as well as the benefits that you hope to experience if you do change, both of those are important to keep in mind. So now we get to the planning phase and starting with deciding what our overarching goal is. So the goals and the New Year's resolutions that we make at the New Year, those frequently work really good as 6-month goals. And so for the example of including more physical activity into my day, maybe where I want to get to eventually is doing something 5 days a week. However, if I engage in any physical activity 0 times a week, then all of a sudden, like we mentioned before, starting off at 5 would probably be a little bit too much. So when we do reach our 5 days a week at 6 months and identify that's where we want to be, now we take it a step back and slash it in half. If everything goes well and we're trudging along as we expect to, what will success look like for us at month 3? So for me, I can reasonably expect to be at 3 days a week when it's month 3. If I start out with 1 day a week, in month 2, I can add a second one. And in month 3, I can add a third one. And I am going right along as I planned and predicted. This is attainable for me. Now, where we know where we want to be in the next few months, then we need to break down that habit into smaller and smaller steps. So, what is the very first step that you need to take to get started? Maybe you need to find the video. Maybe you need a buddy to work out with. Maybe you need to find childcare so that you have free time, or maybe even find a way to include your family. And then finally, we're going to distill this down to the very smallest thing that you can commit to every single day. Now, this concept of the 2-minute habit is from James Clear, who wrote the book Atomic Habits. And the idea is that you identify the very minimum that you can commit to. So on those days where you don't have the willpower, you don't have the motivation, you can fall back on this very small step and still see yourself moving forward towards your goals. So now that we have our first habit that we want to implement, we're going to plan it out into a SMART goal, which is just a very specific statement of the goal that we want to implement, but also making sure that it's something that we can measure, that we can reasonably do and achieve, and that is also relevant to where we want to be and the kind of person that we want to become. And so continuing on with this goal of getting more physical activity in, specifically, I can say I want to engage in some form of movement, then taking that a step further and deciding which form of movement. So maybe a YouTube video of, I don't know, a fun walking exercise YouTube video after work. Now we can take it even a step further and add more detail. So after work, when I get into the door, I'll put my stuff down, and next to that area, I'll have my clothes ready that I can change into so I can move freely. Then I'll have my mat all set out, ready to go. So all I have to do is walk over and I can begin. So it's very, very specific. And the more specific you can be, the better it is. Next, it needs to be measurable. We decided 1 day a week is great to start for at least 2 minutes, at least. Ideally, I would like to try 30 minutes or work up to 30 minutes, but at the very least, if everything is super crazy, I can at least do 2 minutes. Now, is it relevant? For me, I hope that moving my body more is going to boost my mood and help me have more energy throughout the day. And what do you know? Research shows that those two are improved when we move our bodies more. But there's also so many other reasons, and that might be different from person to person. But in the end, it's supporting our goals. And then finally, is it time bound? We can track how many days a week and over the course of a month for sessions. So it's very specific and bound within a certain amount of time. Another idea from James Clear is this inflammation intention. And it sounds pretty much like a SMART goal. And so you're identifying the cue and when and what you'll do for the action. So when I get home, when I put my stuff down, when I change my clothes and go to the mat, then I will put on my video and perform some sort of walking movement, whatever I decide for that day. All right, we have a little bit more planning to go because now that we've identified what will happen when everything goes right, we have this next task of figuring out what to do to help support this in our lives, but also what to do in case something gets in the way. So, to help support us in being able to perform this action to get us closer to our goal, develop this habit, we can optimize certain parts of our life and our environment. So for those of us who would like to practice more mindfulness in our days, maybe optimizing might be having a meditation cushion in a corner of your space. So you have a designated location to prime your brain to say, okay, we're going to practice deep breathing or meditating. Also, if there are misses that occur, stuff comes up, work can get crazy, you have so many obligations at home, or maybe something unexpected comes and gets in the way. What are you going to do in those situations? And so that's why it's really great to have that 2 minute habit to fall back on. Because if you can find those 2 minutes in the day to fit it in, you're still working towards your goals. But also, maybe it's like a kind of a pivot. Maybe you need a moment of quiet, but you are watching your kids, your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, and maybe the only minute that you have is when you're in the bathroom, the door is closed, you're by yourself. Do you have the plan to use a minute there, or where else can you? So identifying potential obstacles that you have in your routine and then figuring out how to overcome them. It'll be great before they happen, but if you notice that down the way this occurrence keeps happening, then you can pivot and figure out what to do next. And then finally, this concept of having community comes up again, especially if it's a social community. who are already doing the thing that you want to do. If when you surround yourself with the people around you, maybe you've heard the saying that we are a product of the people that we spend time with. What better to help get you started on a healthy habit and implement it more easily than spending time with a group who already does it? When you run into problems, they can probably help you work through it because they've already been through it themselves. And also, celebrating your wins with someone who has experience with them too is such a good feeling. And having a type of community like this is a really fantastic way to kind of accelerate your implementation of this habit. And you can find communities like maybe online, at a community center, um, hang out in spaces where you would expect people or folks like that to hang out. Now that we understand the process and the planning that goes into implementing this habit so that you're most likely to succeed, there are also ways just to make it easier. The first being to say it out loud. Because when you have like these thoughts in your head and you're thinking about the ways that you can accomplish your goals and the things that you want to do to get there, your thoughts still are like tumbling around. But when you say it out loud, there's this next layer of processing that happens, and it kind of primes your brain to believe it to be true. And when you say it out loud and your brain has gotten on board, yes, this is what we're trying to do, it'll naturally look for ways for it to become true. It'll look for ways to help you perform this action. And so saying it out loud can make it more concrete and help you stick to the plan. Next, again, starting small. This is a common theme for today, but not only knowing what you can fall back on in case your original idea just doesn't have the time for it today. Counting all the wins that you make, no matter how small or how big they are great ways to build up your confidence. And starting small also helps to build up the skills that you need, really is integrated into your life. Next, we have habit stacking. This is just connecting it to another habit that you already perform consistently. So, a personal anecdote, I understood that wearing sunscreen is important, but I cannot for my life remember to use it. And so I realized that when I had it on a shelf that I never really looked to in the morning, if I took that bottle and I moved it towards my toothbrush, when I would go to my toothbrush and brush my teeth in the morning, I would inevitably run into this bottle of sunscreen. And so the cue of brushing my teeth snowballed into that action of using the sunscreen. Finally, we have this opportunity to make performing this habit rewarding for us. And so that might be giving yourself a sort of prize. So watching your favorite movie while you're doing chores. Maybe you're listening to your favorite music as you go out for a walk. You can even use marbles that you collect in the jar or give yourself gold stars. And after earning so many, you can reward yourself with a treat. That further primes your brain to be more excited and to be more likely or possibly even look forward to doing whatever it is you need to do, especially for any actions that might be especially difficult. So finally, consistency is really key when it comes to implementing habits, Because if you don't get the practice in, if you're not doing it, then how can you expect to keep going? The goal here is to do it so frequently that we internalize this behavior and it just becomes automatic. So if we're not able to do it consistently, or if we do it consistently, we get to our goal, but are you able to continue doing whatever your plan was? If it's too lofty of a goal, it might not be sustainable. And the point of implementing healthy habits is to incorporate them into our lifestyles. And so this idea of maintenance comes into play. Consistency means you can continue to do it even after you reach your goal and maintain that habit over time. One way to figure that out is to use a habit tracker, which also makes your progress visual. And that can be a really motivating tool to use when you can look back and see all of the hard work that you did, no matter how small your action was. But also, it can help you identify if there's any sticking points that you can take a look at and figure out how to make some changes or optimizations so that you can get back on track toward your goal. I'm sure that many of us have a high achieving mindset and do a lot of hard work because we want to excel, and that's perfectly normal. When it comes to practicing a habit, like our second theme of the day is, do it if it's really small. The fact that you show up in the first place is a win in itself, and being able to accept that, even if your effort wasn't 100%, the fact that you showed up means that you earned another point for working towards your goal. But in those moments that you notice maybe your habit tracker isn't filled up as much as you had hoped for, when you're evaluating what's going on, approaching the situation with curiosity and also kindness, approaching ourselves with this idea that we need to label it in some sort of way, like viewing ourselves as good for getting it done or bad because we couldn't make the time. Judgments like that can hold us back from making improvements. And so approaching ourselves with this neutral stance can help us move forward a lot more easily. And then, of course, being flexible because things don't always go according to plan. And on your own individual health journey, it will look different from someone else. And so comparisons don't need to be made with others, or even if you have practiced this goal in the past before, because things are different. But when we get in a car and we go to a place, we take turns towards one path and get there eventually. But also, if there's a roadblock, we can make other turns and still get to the same point. So now we are into this portion that will cover some of these areas that you're interested in, starting with nutrition. And so these are some tips or actions that you might consider incorporating to get you started. So for nutrition, sometimes it just means that we don't know what we can add into our days. Sometimes we identify like one area that we want to work on. So for instance, if snacking is something, maybe planning in advance some nutritious snack choices. And so you don't have to take that extra second and make that decision in the moment. You can make it in advance and free up some brain space, maybe get some apples and a bag of mixed nuts, so you have it ready at work. Next, doing something like optimizing your environment. So if you're trying to include more fruits and veggies, first of all, do you have it on hand in your house? That making them easily accessible is obviously like the only way that you'll get more, unless you're also another tip is to add them to your orders if you're ordering out. But also, if you don't reach for them because they're not washed, and in the moment you don't want to wash them, getting pre-cut, pre-washed, highly recommend, or even washing them yourselves before you put it away. Something that I like to do is while I'm preparing dinner, I don't necessarily all the time want to prepare a vegetable to go with it. So on those days, I like to eat a salad while I'm preparing it. One popular habit that a lot of folks adopt is either decreasing soda or decreasing their caffeine intake, but replacing that with an option. So if you want to do that, what will you drink in its place? So maybe looking for a zero sugar or an herbal tea. Next, some of us want to move more in our days, and I understand that it can be so hard, especially if that's not something that you're used to or doing consistently. And so doing something like planning it in advance so that you have a game plan while you go into it can be just the stepping stone to getting started. But also, do you have everything in place to make it just as easy as possible? Do you have your equipment ready? Do you have your mat out? Do you have a gym on your way home that you are planning on going to? But maybe you're not at that point where you are finding new ways to set aside time to incorporate this sort of habit. So maybe tacking it on to something that you're already doing, likely answering emails or sitting in meetings, maybe even such as this. But you can march in place, whether that be standing or sitting down, and your cue for having these emails, that time of email answering in the day be what signals the I can get in some movement like pretty easily doing something I'm already doing. And then finally, making it rewarding. You might want to treat yourself to a new pair of running shoes when you sign up for an event. And now for sleeping better. Sleeping is so pivotal to our health, but is this another situation when making time to sleep more can be pretty daunting, and when we're so busy, maybe a lofty goal for some of us. And so for this instance, I highly recommend finding ways to optimize your space. Because if you're not able to find more time to sleep, then maybe you can work some things around so that you can improve the quality of your sleep. That might look like brushing your teeth when your wind down notification, or even setting a wind down notification on your phone, using that as a signal to brush your teeth. So if you are like myself and frequently waiting until you feel like you want to brush your teeth, then that can help kickstart the getting ready for bed routine at a certain time. Maybe you have lights that are shining in through your window. Getting some blackout curtains are super helpful, but also maybe you don't have that problem, but you likely have electronics in your room. Sometimes they have lights that become quite bright when you are ready to go to bed. And so you can do something like putting tape on top of those so it creates a darker space. Getting some earplugs, just some more ideas there. Finally, uh, promoting more balance in our lives, spending more time with the people that we love. Do we have a day that we can dedicate to spending time with friends as well as family? Maybe it's hard for you to concentrate at certain times of day. Maybe it's your phone, maybe it's something else, but using a grayscale on a screen can maybe help divert some of that distraction. If you're already going on a walk a day, but you'd like to invite more mindfulness, maybe adding a meditation to that. And maybe if you are completely swamped with works and projects and meetings keep popping up and you just don't have any time, if you're able to consider blocking out some time on your calendar so that you know you have a portion of your day to dedicate for the things that you really need to work on and get done. All right, so now that you have the process, you have some tips on how to get started for whatever healthy habits that you're trying to add. I believe in you and you can do this and trust the process. Start small. It doesn't matter how big or how small you go. You'll get the hang of it over time as long as you're able to do it consistently.